Got your Okay, colleagues, good evening. Welcome to Colchester Town Hall in the city of Colchester. Lovely to see you all tonight. Members of the public, visiting councillors, members of the panel, and other officers and friends. Thanks for coming along. So, there are no practice evacuation alarms of any sort planned this evening. If anything does happen, you do hear an alarm, please make your way safely down via the main staircase or the rear staircase onto the high street, and if required, to the back of the town hall. This meeting is being recorded live on the internet, so with that in mind, enjoy it, and you can always watch it back on demand as well if you would like to refresh yourself on what's happened. Discreet use of mobile phones is absolutely fine, or any other electronic devices, but please turn the ringtones off and try and be engaged and enjoy the meeting as much as you can, because it's going to be a fascinating evening. We may have a break at 7:30. Depending on progress. My name is Councillor Darius Laws. I am a councillor for Rural North Ward, and I'm the chairman of the Scrutiny Panel. And we have a very exciting evening tonight. We have not one but two headline acts. We have Councillor Paul Smith, who's going to be talking to us about housing, and we have Councillor Goss, who's going to be talking to us about neighbourhood services and all things waste and recycling, etc. So, can we please just go around the room and introduce ourselves? May we start over there with Councillor Young, please?
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Julie Young, Greenstead Ward.
Hello, Tracy Arnold, Stanway Ward.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End Ward.
Councillor Faith Smalls, representing Row Hedge, Old Heath and the Hive.
Owen Hull, Democratic Services Officer.
Jessica Douglas, Head of People and Advisor to the panel.
Dennis Willits, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Councillor Thomas Rowe, representing Rural North Ward.
Thank you, everyone. Right, we have no substitutions for this evening. We're all here and present. There are no urgent items to report. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? I see none. Okay, then we will look at the minutes from the previous two meetings that we have the minutes for. I thought an excellent set of minutes there, and I'm happy with them, but I'll look around the room and make sure that everyone else is content.
Chairman, can I ask whether the recommendations in regard to data security from the meeting 4th of July were presented to Cabinet, and were they accepted?
Apologies for that delay. I will consult with my colleague Richard Clifford, who clerks Cabinet, and check where we are with those and to which meeting they went and the response that they received.
Thank you, everyone. They are clearly as action points from our minutes from this panel to Cabinet, so I'm sure they have got their way there, but if they haven't, then due diligence, as Councillor Willits points out, we just check on that one. Okay, thank you. Right. General, have your say is the next item this evening. Is there anyone who wishes to have their say from the public or elsewhere?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll just get the have your say sheet for you.
Good evening. We have a general have your say contributor tonight, Mrs. Spantidaki. Forgive me if that's incorrect. From a fantastic organisation, Community 360. If you'd like to step up. You want to talk about Community 360? Right, great. Okay, if you'd like to step up and take a seat there where the microphone is. And let me explain. It's very straightforward. If you haven't done this before, I realise it's quite a strange and great. Then you'll be an old hand. So you've got 3 minutes to speak. You might hear a bell around 2 just to indicate it's time to wrap up. We will then respond if we can, and then you'll then have a chance to reply to that. So take your time. Over to you.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. As I said before, I have come to a full council meeting in 2018. Maybe some remember, to speak about a man and his son killing the wild birds and wild animals in the Bullwoods area, and the police and the zone wardens doing nothing about it, which is fact. I don't want to elaborate on this today. I would like to come on the full council meeting of the 18th of October for this issue, the zone wardens basically. I asked which day should I come for the Community 360 decision to be housed in the Holy Trinity, and they told me to come on the day of the scrutiny meeting. That's why I'm here today. And basically, I have emailed your leader, and I've spoken quite a lot with Mr. Gocher, who is the councillor of my area. I only have 3 minutes, so I don't know how to wrap up everything in this, so you can ask any questions you want. Basically, I want to say that this decision is totally wrong. Community 360 had the experience of quite a long time experience going through this March first time is basically in the threat of homelessness, and because they are there like the council and Peabody and everything, I was signposted to go to that building, and then I saw their board with sessions, and as I had time I joined their sessions, and I basically I've been basically to most of them, and for a period of at least 3 months. So I can tell you, and I'm not the only one who can tell you, the sessions are crap compared to the other communities sessions and everything else. There is no formal tuition. For example, I was in the Textiles Collective, which is the main sessions they offer the whole Tuesday and Wednesday. There was no formal tuition. I left after a month because I was banned, and I will come to that, not knowing how to use a sewing machine, if that's possible. Okay, so from 11 to 3, 1 month, and I never learned how to use a sewing machine. And basically what I found out being all this time there was that all the fabric donated to the Community 360 was given to the manager of the Textiles Collective, which took it with her trolley to her shop opposite the Sainsbury's. And I was asking for fabric to do projects, and they didn't have any. Okay, so this is, I made a complaint that the donated fabric is for the community and the projects in the building of the Community 360, whether it's from the Community 360 itself or someone they appoint to, like the Textiles Collective. And they just then, the Textiles Collective manager banned me from her sessions for no real reason. The Community 360 became very funny against me, and they have now banned me from their whole building with no justifiable reason. I have proof and evidence that what they say the reason was is false, and they don't review the decision or follow the complaints procedure correctly.
Okay. We've given you a little over the time there, so I'm just going to initially respond, and thank you for coming. I'm sorry to hear you've had some difficulties there. There's a lot of detail going on there, and you mentioned that you've written to the leader of the council about that. So I, as chair of this panel, will check in with him to discuss what the allegations are in your letter, which are no doubt longer than 3 minutes worth of presentation. So I will check in with him on that one.
And Mr. Mark Gocher, because
with respect, I'm going to check in with the leader of the council.
He doesn't know much because he didn't meet with me.
No, but you've written to the leader of the council, so I'm reassuring you that I will speak to the leader of the council about this matter. I would say gently, though, that there is consensus amongst the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Labour Party and everyone else in full council to make the most of that fantastic old building. And I believe there is consensus that Community 360 is a good prospect for that old building. And that's a reality. So I'm just managing your expectations on that one. So if you were to ask me personally, am I happy that Community 360 are going in that building? My answer is yes.
Am I answering?
You are allowed to respond.
Okay, so you are basing your decision based on what you see, and I was just going to say a Community 360 is like a rotten apple, nice from the outside, rotten inside. You know what you've been told, and when you go there, you see some nice pictures on the walls because I've been where the university came and do some filming. I was there 3 months, from 11 until 3, so I know a little bit better. It's not a matter of a personal experience, and I'm not the only one to tell you. I want to say I am from inside, and I know, okay? They don't give valuable sessions to the people. They don't put the community first. In my example, they value the business in a higher position than the community. So they wanted to give the fabric to this lady to help her business, rather me, who was homeless and in need, nearly homeless and in need. You understand? So you want to give the Holy Trinity to a charity that will serve the community. They are not the right people. Beacon House, for example, they serve the community. Choose one of these charities, please. And I wanted to say, because it's a church, it has to have some Christian values, okay, that whoever is there, and they don't. And Christ said, do not make the house of my Father a house of merchandise.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I assure you I will speak with the leader about this, but I will reiterate my personal view on record, and a view that I believe is shared by every member of the council. We have, since the 1950s, had a building within the centre of Colchester that's Grade 1 listed. It's a Saxon building. It's pre-Norman conquest. It's a stunning building, and it has been derelict of use since the 1950s. There's been various attempts to have a host in there to make it work. We now, as an authority, and I sound like I'm speaking on behalf of the leader, and I've not got his permission to do this, but my own feeling is, as an authority, we've made a right decision in finding a partner there to take that building forward. And I'm very happy with what I know about that so far, but I will, as a promise to you, check in with the leader about some of the concerns you brought tonight to make sure that that things are being done properly. That is the end of your contribution. No, you can't, I'm afraid. That is the end. We've got a lot of business to get through tonight. I appreciate your time.
It's not just a building, it's the house of the Lord. That's all I want.
Okay, thank you for your time tonight. Right, we do not have any other guests at all. I will just check my crib sheet and see what else we need to go through before we have the headline acts tonight. We have cabinet or portfolio holder decisions for calling. We have none. Items requested by members of the panel and other members, we have none. So we move on to the headline acts. It's a double header. I'm going to call up first Councillor Paul Smith, not to be confused with another Paul Smith who lives in Highwoods, who was recently politically involved. This is the original Paul Smith. I could have used another word, but the original Paul Smith. Paul, you're here to talk to us about your portfolio, which is a very, very important and complex one. Housing. Over to you.
Thank you very much. As you say, Chairman, the original and I would say the best as well. Thank you very much. The housing portfolio is very challenging. I don't think I would have a single councillor in Colchester who I would need to tell how difficult the housing situation is. Councillors are regularly approached by people facing a homeless situation in a dreadful situation. As of last week, we had 315 families homeless in Colchester in temporary accommodation. Of those, 70 were not even in temporary accommodation, they were in bed and breakfast accommodation. Nearly half of those we could not accommodate in Colchester. You can imagine for a family with children at school, the prospect of losing your house through no fault of your own, say through a Section 21 eviction. All that can be offered is bed and breakfast accommodation in Ipswich or Clacton, whatever. The children have got to get to school, they might go to different schools. How are you going to arrange that? Your job may be in Colchester, you might work shifts. How are you going to arrange that? Your family and support operations are all in Colchester. This is a national tragedy. It's not unique to Colchester. Other authorities in Essex have very, very similar levels of this situation. The ones nearer London have higher levels of homelessness. So when I took over the portfolio, and I have to pay credit to the work that was done previously on there, because a lot of the things that are happening in the portfolio didn't just start on the 5th of May or whenever, they were ongoing. Things like the decarbonisation fund, the bid that we've got in there, that's going to improve over 100 units of accommodation for Colchester Borough homes. And Chairman, you may be pleased to know that of those homes, the ward that has got the highest number that will be benefiting this is your own ward. Every ward, apart from Highwoods, is actually benefiting to some extent in the form of this, which is going to improve energy efficiency, help the green agenda, but also reduce the costs for the tenants. But I think what I also need to explain is what I'm doing as portfolio holder to try and address this. It's clear to me that one solution that we've got to do is we've got to build more affordable housing for rent for people in Colchester. And to do that, we need to face some very difficult decisions. We currently have a model that checks the viability of these projects. That model is a historic one. The interest rate on that model is assumed at 2.5%. I have to tell you, councillors, that interest rate is no longer viable. It was a good rate a year or 2 years ago. It's not now. We will have to increase that rate to 3.5%, possibly higher. That is going to have a serious impact on the viability of many schemes. In addition, the assumptions that we've made for the long-term cost of repairs have also becoming outdated. You only have to think of the situation of those local authorities that had cladding issues as a result of the Grenfell disaster, the impact that we had there. The allowance that we've got in there of only £500 per property a year is something which is now, given the demands that are being placed on housing associations with damp, mould and other things for major structural repairs, is too low a figure. These things are going to give us a serious difficulty in making any new scheme affordable at the current level of rents. And that is why I'm coming to the conclusion that for the new builds only, and I stress that only for our new properties, we are going to have to consider whether instead of charging the social rent at 50% of market rents, we move to an affordable rent of say 70%, certainly a level below the local housing benefit level. This is not something that anyone would want to do lightly, because it means that we're going to be increasing rents for those in these new properties, but that will increase the viability of them and enable us to build more properties. Effectively, we'll be spreading the jam more thinly. Another area that I've looked at is the mix of properties that we're getting. We currently have a target for the number of properties to build, to buy. Clearly, if you buy 1-bedroom properties, they're a lot cheaper than 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom properties. However, the average waiting time for someone wanting a 3-bedroom property for Colchester Borough Homes now is over 3 years. For a 1-bedroom property, it's a year and a half. These are, of course, for Band A and Band B properties, people in highest need of them. To address that, I've taken the decision that I think we should be concentrating our efforts predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly on purchasing the larger properties, which of course does have the advantage that it might mean people can move. So if someone moves from an overcrowded 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom, that frees up a 2-bedroom. Someone can then move on there. You can possibly help more people. What it does mean is that when this committee is looking at some of the performance figures for the number of units of housing that we've built or purchased, we may be missing those targets, because I'll be buying bigger properties rather than smaller ones, because I think that accurately reflects the needs that we have here in Colchester at the moment. And to give you an example of why that is now so important, the level of housing benefit for a 3-bedroom property in Colchester is currently round about £800 a month. The market rent for that property is £1,300 a month, which means that someone on benefits would have to find £500 a month to stay in a 3-bedroom property. That is an impossible situation. And that is one of the reasons why we're seeing more and more people becoming homeless. There are many other reasons as well, and I'd be happy to go into those in response to any questions that you may have. I think the other point I would like to make about the situation in Colchester is that the council, through its local plan, through the requirement of 30% social housing, is doing a lot. However, we are now finding, and it's not just in Colchester, that registered social landlords are unwilling to take up the units that are being delivered by the builders. And the rule is that if no social housing provider comes forward, the builders can instead sell them on the open market and make a much smaller contribution. So effectively, instead of getting, say, 4 properties at social rent or affordable rent, we'd get enough money to maybe buy 1, if we're lucky. One of the reasons why that is happening is that the government introduced a rent cap last year of 7%. For a social housing provider, that was a devastating blow, because they had been promised rents would be going up by CPI plus 1%, which would be a figure of 11 or 12%. That's an awful lot of income to lose in 1 year. And many social housing providers are now feeling it's too risky to buy new properties, particularly at high interest rates, when the government may impose a further rent cap in the future, thus destroying their financial viability. So what I've painted is a difficult picture. And I make no bones about it. I think it is a reality that families in this city are facing, that many of them are facing the prospects being evicted through no fault of their own and having a local authority which is going to struggle to place them in adequate accommodation. I wish there were some easy solutions or magic wands that could be done. However, my predecessors certainly didn't have them, and sadly, I haven't either. I would be very happy to take any questions from any of the panel, so I've kept this presentation short because there are many other things I could cover, but I'll go for that.
Thank you for that. It's clear to me that you are on top of your brief in the way in which you've presented tonight. You've given us some real meat to get our teeth into there. So I will kick this off, and then I'm going to call Councillor Young, and I think I saw Councillor Rowe. So I understand anecdotally that we have some scenarios in the city right now where there are people living in temporary accommodation that can easily be described as overcrowded, in particular young families. Who, as you mentioned, through no fault of their own, through Section 21 notices, may well have been served eviction notices. And also, let's face it, the country has a mental health crisis, and that no doubt contributes towards domestic violence and the need for people to flee their permanent homes and might find themselves in that precarious situation as you described. And I note that, you know, we no longer have multiple intakes in a school year, do we? We only have one intake year. So that makes it quite difficult when moving across the city to work out how to get children to school. So I really feel for that scenario. But I'm not being political here, but I just would like your honest appraisal on where you think we're at, because from my understanding over the last 50 years, Colchester has outperformed other comparable local authorities in terms of the house numbers we've built. And yet we still find ourselves in this situation where people are not in permanent accommodation, and we're seeing a rising number of people in temporary and perhaps accommodation that you or I wouldn't choose to be in. Why is that? And, you know, we've built between 500 and 800 houses every year for the last 50 years, you know, and yet we're not scratching the sides. We have a permanent 3,000 social need waiting list. What's going on there? What do you honestly think is happening? What are some of the solutions that you can impact upon to try and address this dire situation you describe?
All right, Chairman. Yes, we've built a lot of houses, but we've not built at a rate that equals our population growth. In the latest ONS figures from the 2011 census, Colchester, in that decade up to the last census 2021, population grew by roughly 11% a year. East of England averaged about 8.3%. The country as a whole, 6%. So we have a situation where lots of people want to come and live in Colchester. That is a good thing, that we have an economy and a society that people want to come to. Our problem, as you're quite right to say, is our housing numbers. And more importantly, so, in fact, over the past 20 years has been our loss of social housing. The number of properties lost under right to buy come to somewhere in the region of 4,000 properties. We've not been able to replace those on anything like a one-for-one basis. At best, we were able to replace on the rate of maybe for every 4 that we lost, replaced with 1. And that I'm looking at Councillor Young, who had the portfolio for many years, you know, to see whether she was in agreement with those figures. So there is a net deficit of rented properties in the social sector. Interestingly enough, the number in that same 10-year period, the number of private rented properties in Colchester is up 10%. That's where the big growth has been. So we've lost housing in the social rented sector. we've gained housing in the private rented sector. Often it's the same housing. You can go around many estates in my ward, in Councillor Young ward, in Councillor McCarthy's ward, council estates where many of those properties have been sold but now rented out again. The difference is they're being rented out at market rents rather than social rents. And as I've already said, many people can't afford the £1,300 a month market rent for a 3-bedroom property. So I think one of the big problems that all governments over that period have faced has been that they have not built enough social housing for rent. And that's had an impact on labour mobility, and it's caused a great number of social problems. So that's where I would come from, and my solution would be a substantial investment. All the political parties are talking about building large numbers of houses, let's say 300,000. The private sector alone, the market, has never produced more than 200,000 a year. I suggest that leaves a gap of 100,000 social housing for rent, which could and should be centrally funded to deal with the housing crisis across the whole of the country.
And you're also saying that by having more 3 beds in this authority, that could free up at the lower end of the market to help the overall picture. That's your belief?
Absolutely. If you build a 3-bedroom property at the moment, you might need someone who's in an overcrowded 2-bedroom into that one. That then frees up your 2-bedroom property. You then might move someone out of a 1-bedroom property into that 2-bedroom. That frees up another property. So by one purchase of a 3-bed property, I might have improved the housing conditions of 3 families in Colchester.
And would you like to see the government incentivise people at the latter stages of life who are perhaps living in 3, 4, 5-bedroom houses, possibly even on their own, incentivised to consider relinquishing that? Would that be an idea?
Colchester Borough Homes has for a long time run exactly that scheme. They offer cash incentives, help with moving, and also some of the new accommodation we've got. For example, Elfrida House, which I had the pleasure of coming round recently, is going to be opening shortly, providing excellent brand new accommodation. And hopefully that will tempt some of our tenants in their existing 3-bedroom properties in that area or in other areas to move to that one and free up that family accommodation. So yes, that is something which we are definitely doing at Colchester Borough Homes has done for many years. It is something which I'm sure we would all encourage because it's just making good use.
Okay, and thank you. That'll be enough for me for the moment. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, colleagues. Councillor Young.
No, not at all. Excuse me, I've just got a bit hay fever tonight. Yeah, I mean, you know, when I had the portfolio, I think when I started, it was around 270 in temporary accommodation. And over the course of that, I only had the portfolio for a year, housing actually. I think when I left, it was about 285 in temporary accommodation. So we're now at 315. So we're seeing an increasing amount of people in temporary accommodation. And it's not getting any better, it's just getting worse. I think you're right. I think the need is for larger properties, 3 and also 4-bedroom properties. But yeah, that would be quite a stretch to start buying 4-bedroom properties. And that would help families to move out of their existing overcrowded accommodation. But I think it's got to be a mixed solution. We're going on a visit on the 6th of November to start looking at modular housing. And we've already went to Chelmsford to look at the modular housing which CHP provide there. And actually it is pretty good. And when I was last had the portfolio, we were putting people in caravans in tendering. And I think, you know, you've got to weigh up the choices actually. And if you get a secure unit which is easily maintained and turned over quickly, I think the difference in rent with those 2-bedroom units in Chelmsford was around £700. And I think we were paying something like 1,200 for temporary accommodation. So you can immediately see there's a 500 per unit gap in terms of that budget. So I think we've got to consider all options. So I think modular housing might provide some solution to it, and we ought to be looking at that, but that might take a while to deliver. I also think we ought to think about looking at bungalows, because from the evidence I got in Chelmsford, and they're about 100 units ahead of us in terms of their problems at the time they were. I expect it's about the same level. And as you say, in London boroughs, they've got about 6,000 people in temporary accommodation. So the budget is immense. And as you rightly say, I can only agree with you that the 7% rent rise really just completely scuppered our financial models. And I'm not surprised that housing associations are not taking on additional stock because it's just impossible to actually make that stack up. So I think bungalows might be an option to look at. You lose more land by providing bungalows, but they are popular, and there are certainly some people in 3-bedroomed houses that perhaps for whatever reason don't want to go into sheltered but might consider a move into bungalows. I think Colchester Borough Homes don't have any problem with letting bungalows. It's an unenviable position to try and manage the situation, because, and I remember when I was portfolio holder, you get really heart-rending stories, and I think all of us as councillors often get called up telling us, oh, I'm in the most horrendous temporary accommodation unit, it's not acceptable, something needs to be done. I've got, various things in my life that make life difficult to me, whether they're in mental or physical problems, and we've allocated a property to them that they don't see as suitable. But frankly, I think officers do a really hard job in actually placing people, and sometimes it's the only accommodation we can actually secure for them. So yeah, that's it for me, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I do apologise. You're substituting tonight for Councillor McLean. I think I got that wrong earlier. I was thrown by something. I can't think what it was. Okay, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a couple of questions. First up, just a discrepancy in the numbers I'd like to understand, and apologies if it might be a very easy one, hopefully it is. It says on the website that the category A people are 84, I think it says at the moment. Yeah, I think the discussion that you had with Councillor Young was around 315 homeless. Could you just shed some light on the discrepancy between those numbers, please? Thank you.
Certainly. The category A homeless are those awarded that category as part of the home choice letting system. Somebody who presents tomorrow as homeless, the council has a duty to care for, will be allocated temporary accommodation. They would then be awarded a rating under the home choice system. It may well not be category A. What's been interesting about the people on the housing waiting list is that the numbers over the past 5 years in categories A and B and C have remained relatively constant, but there's been about a 600 drop in the lower categories. One of the reasons I suspect for that is that it is now, with a housing shortage, very rare from anyone from a category below B really to get a property, but certainly C. And so therefore people have dropped off. So the number of people on the actual housing list has gone down, but the numbers in the highest need have remained pretty much constant. Has that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor. I appreciate that. That clears it up. As I was looking at the numbers, and I think there are around about 3,000 or something, I think, is on the list at the moment. I think around about 45% of those are in the category A, B, C. Interesting to say that above B, it's highly unlikely for you to get anything. So yes, interesting the way that works out. I think about 55 on the CDE, I think it was. But anyway, the point that you raised around the funding model, and the recent increase in the interest rates. Apologies, I don't know how this is funded, but would the council not look to take a long-term position on that funding? And so why do we not look to, obviously, when rates were like 0.5% or whatever, I think we can look historically and say they weren't going to get any lower than that. So anything that we could possibly lock in at that for the longest period of time would have been good. And in hindsight, would have we been able to do that, or is that not something that we could do due to the way the council is funded?
Right. Interesting point there. Actually, this council did exactly what you suggested. When we had the opportunity, when the government decided to sell us back our own housing, we took the decision to take the borrowing for that over 50 years. And we locked in at what was then very low interest rates. What we are not allowed to do is to go to the Public Loan Works Board, borrow money at low interest rates, and speculate that interest rates will rise in the future. There were a few councils that did do this in the past. Hammersmith and Fulham comes to mind, and I believe the ones in the north of Scotland as well were also involved in some of these things, and it came unstuck. So gambling with taxpayers' money, i.e. borrowing long when you don't have an immediate need for the money, is not something that councils are now permitted to do.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting that we borrow the money that we don't need. I was suggesting that the money that we have, and I think you've answered that question by pointing out that for the stuff that we can borrow and secure against particular property, we've tried to do that as much as we can, and we've done it for 50 years. So
yeah, I will also point out the interest rate I quoted, the 3.5%, is actually the rate on 30-year government gilts. Because obviously current interest rates on the short-term markets are 5.5%, 6%. So the reason I was quoting the lower rate in the model was that we were indeed envisaging that we will be borrowing long-term to fund a long-term investment like property.
yeah, of course, that's good.
A couple of more points, Councillor Rowe, if we can. I've got Councillor Willits, I've got Councillor Smalls. Anyone else? I'm just looking around the room. Okay, over to you, Councillor Rowe.
Okay, sorry, apologies, I've lost my thread. Where was I? You pointed out the right to buy lost you 4,000 houses. I think the current portfolio is 5,000? Well, about 4,000 houses, yeah. I think the current portfolio is around 7. Is that ballpark-ish? Yeah, okay, cool. So of that, what are the number of people who are in the future eligible to potentially be able to buy their council house through the right to buy scheme? How many of those do we have, and what's the sort of downside risk on the size of the portfolio versus the risk of the 3,000 odd people that we have in the waiting list, or give or take 1,500 people, or wherever you want to slice the pie? How do we manage against that, and what are we doing to sort of try to move some of those individuals, if possible? I don't know what the rules are, but what are we trying to do to move some of those individuals into the rented sector to, as you say, sort of, if you can push people from a particular situation into the rented sector, once they've got past a certain threshold in their income, they may be then viable to go into the rented sector. We manage that. Do we have any numbers around that? Do we know what those numbers are, and do we understand where our risk lies in that? Do you see what I'm getting at? Yeah, thanks.
Right. Basically, any council tenant after a certain period has got the right to buy a property after a tenancy of 5 years. There are exceptions for properties that have been adapted, new builds, etc. But basically, most tenants would be eligible for the right to buy after they've been in the property for a set number of years. We have no scope to say to a tenant of Colchester Borough Homes, we want you to move out of your Colchester Borough Homes property now and go to the private rented sector because we think you can afford it or whatever. To do that would require primary legislation and would be something that would be very difficult to do or enforce. So there is clearly a risk. And one of the other things in the model which I think we need to change is that we've currently had an assumption in the model that we'd hold on to a property for 60 years. That would be its economic life. I think that needs to be reduced. And we're looking at a figure of potentially 40 years. So that we need to get the return quicker in there, because that's a more realistic expectation, given that you have right to buy in there and all the other things. And you also have to look at how housing regulations are now changing, that you'll probably need to have a shorter economic lifespan of a property, because it will need major renovation work to meet whatever the standards will be in 40 years' time.
But outside of that, reducing it from 60 to 40, we don't know what the number is that we could potentially lose in, say, the next 10 years, for example. I mean, like, if we knew what that number was, we could ultimately lobby government and say the likelihood is out of, you know, the 7,000 houses we're going to get, X number are going to be, are likely to be purchased by their owners through the scheme, and therefore we will have a deficit of Y.
We can extrapolate from previous figures. We tend to lose roughly 100 units a year through right to buy. It varies a little bit from time to time. My guess is that number will fall in the next year or two because interest rates are a lot higher. So people will be less able to afford it. But we may well lose out when the economy picks up. That will cause the backlog. But the other issue is that we tend to lose the bigger properties under right to buy. It's not a straightforward average loss across the whole portfolio. We tend to lose the more valuable properties, which are of course the more expensive ones to replace, and they're the 3 and 4 bedroom units, which we now desperately need.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thank you very much. I vaguely answered the question. I appreciate that. One last question. So solar panels and heat pumps and reducing our carbon footprint. How much on average, do we know, do we save per house after these measures are fitted? How much have we spent on these measures to date? And when do we expect to break even on these? Over sort of what term are we looking at for the initial investment that we put in?
Okay, obviously this depends on each individual property and each investment, but talking about solar panels, I think it was about 12, 13 years ago, we had a large programme of installing solar panels on our council properties. This was a scheme which saves the average resident somewhere in the region of £150 a year on their fuel costs. It's also a scheme which now, through the feed-in tariff, generates approximately £100,000 a year to the housing revenue account. The cost of that particular scheme to this council was zero, because the then portfolio holder, Councillor Bourne, and myself were involved in negotiations with the developers who did it, and we were able to get what was an extremely good deal, because we were very flexible and quick in doing it. It did mean that we did have a frantic few weeks, didn't we, when we were sticking solar panels on everything that moved. And I know Councillor Young lived through those times, but that turned out to be an absolutely brilliant investment. And at one stage, we had the highest percentage of solar panels of any Almo in the country on their properties.
Sounds like a fantastic scheme, and well done for managing to get it for nothing and get the developers to pay for it. However, that was 13 years ago. Is there anything more recent that you went to that we've done? Because you did say that we do it on a regular basis. So I'm assuming that unless we still have that scheme going where we're getting them for nothing, they're now costing us something. So what's the sort of the return on investment for those panels that we're implementing now?
We're not currently installing many new panels because the best site for panels, i.e. the south-facing ones, were the ones that we put the panels on at the start. We didn't have panels for everywhere, so it was done on that there. We are doing some heat pumps and some energy efficiency ones, and I believe there have been some very useful ones in rural north that we've tested on there. The internal rates of return of them, I don't know off the top of my head.
Which is fair enough. Fair enough. You don't know that, yeah.
No. Would you mind if I email you afterwards? I'd be just interested to know.
It certainly will. We'll look at that.
Awesome.
I know
Thank you
that.
very much, Councillor Smith.
Okay, Councillor Willits. Sorry, not Councillor Willits. Have I got Councillor Smalls first or Willits? Yes, it is Willits. Go on then. I need to get better.
Tut. Councillor Smith, I've listened to what you're saying, and clearly you've got a phenomenally difficult portfolio to manage, and you're being pulled in all sorts of directions. Listening, I'm not sure whether we're on the side of the tenant or whether we're on the side of the landlord, social landlord, or whether we're on both their sides at the same time. What does come out of your presentation is that there really is no solution. We seem to be tinkering around the edges. There is one fact which is causing chaos, and that is that housing is too expensive given the average earnings that we have at the moment. And as long as that position continues, then you have negligible scope, or you haven't shown that you have got positive scope to do much to relieve the problem that we have. For instance, you mentioned that it was really hitting the HRA. The government had put a limit of 7% on the increase in rents, because that was done to protect the tenant. If you look at it from the point of view of the tenant, who are hit by cost of living increases, and if they have to pay more, then there will be other normalizations in the network because they can't afford to pay anymore. So that will have implications on the total cost of housing. If we look at the 30% social that we have as one of our local plan targets, what that is doing is moving more of the cost onto the 70% of houses which are being sold at market rate. So that is edging up the cost of market rate. And the only solution which seems to have any merit coming out of what we've heard today was from Councillor Young talking about the modular approach, because unless you can find a way of actually reducing the cost of a house which our tenants are happy to live in, that it doesn't cost a bomb to heat, that the rents are reasonably low in proportion to the wages that they're earning, unless that conundrum can be solved, all the other issues that you were mentioning are really tinkering around the edge. So I sort of welcome the task that you're doing and you're looking to do, but I'm not convinced that it's going to make a significant difference given the financial model we have at the moment, where the cost of a house, be it one that the council builds or anyone else builds, is such a great multiplier of the average earnings of the people who want to live in that house.
Thank you. I would come back to you on a few of those points. I mean, you're quite right saying that housing is too expensive, but I would suggest that the government's desire was not to protect the tenants by imposing the rent freeze, because had they done that, or the rent cap, because if they had wanted to protect tenants, they'd have imposed that on the private sector as well as the social rented sector. The fact they discriminated and only penalised the social rented sector, I think was a serious political error. And that has caused a lot of harm in what we're seeing there. Clearly, when we're trying to look to reduce the cost of housing, there are other areas that can be looked at. The margins that builders make, their land banking, land valuations in this country, the fact that when a field is agriculture, it's worth £10,000 an acre. As soon as it gets planning permission, it's suddenly worth £1 million an acre. That gain should be captured for the community and not for whoever happened to be the fortunate landowner when the local plan went through and made the changes. If that was done, that would provide the income and the costs that would be able to subsidise the cost of the housing and to produce the houses that people need. And whilst you say what we're doing is not making a significant difference, I would say to you, councillor, if you were that family that was able to move into that new property that we have built or that we have purchased, yes, there may be 314 others still suffering, but for that one family, we have made a very, very substantial difference. And it's that sort of thought process that's something that I take a great deal of comfort from, and I know the team that works in housing is, that we may not be able to solve the entire problem for everyone, but for some families where we make that intervention and we make that difference, it is a very, very significant difference. And I think you would agree with me that when that happens, that is something that's worth doing. If we could do it for more, better.
And that perhaps then is the question. We can feel good if we, because of your policies, we can house an extra family who would not otherwise have been housed. But we're a bulk supplier of housing. We don't solve the problem providing one house for one family that's in need. We have to have, as an administration or an authority, we have to have a policy which will provide a significant number of the people who need houses with houses. And at the moment, we rejoice that we've housed one family, but that isn't good enough. We need to be rejoicing that we're tackling the problem in the scale it's presented to us. And that is, I'm not getting the vibrations that we have a strategy to do that at the moment. Yes, if government made different decisions, yes, if people stop flooding into the country with megabucks in their pocket and buying up the best houses, if there are lots of what ifs which are outside our control. And we have to focus, I think, or you have to focus, and we have to tease out of you what you're going to do to improve the situation significantly, given the situation we're in, knowing that we cannot change government policy at a whim, but we've got to have a realistic programme for dealing with the housing crisis which we have in the city.
Indeed, but it's not just Colchester that has a housing crisis. It's Tendring, it's Braintree, it's Ipswich, it's Mid Suffolk, it's all the other councils in East Anglia have got this crisis, and those in London have got it worse. So I suggest that actually it is looking to government policy and government changes that's going to make the significant difference. Because all we can do with the criteria that we've got at the moment, we are not able to go out and build hundreds of council houses. I wish that we could, because there have been administrations in this council for 15 of the past 16 years that would most definitely have built lots more social housing for rent in Colchester, but we were not allowed to do that by the various governments at that time. So I think we can do what we can in Colchester, but I cannot produce a policy that's going to reduce the 315 families in temporary accommodation to virtually zero without government assistance. And if I could, I think I'd be applying for the Prime Minister's job And if I could do it, I think I'd damn well deserve it.
Oh, okay. Can I shift on to a slightly different area, and that's one which we as local councillors come under pressure, and that is the extent to which there is a sort of a local bias in the housing allocations for people who live close to, or live in a ward or close by. It is an often repeated mantra, you know, we'd like our children to be able to live reasonably close to us. And at the moment, the housing allocation scheme does not seem to be able to deliver that. Now, we hear that there are constraints, that we have a housing allocation system which operates in over 5 authorities, and they are given equal weighting according to their need, regardless of where they come from. So do you acknowledge that it is a reasonable request that perhaps parents should hope that their children, if they need housing, should be housed close by? And if so, is it something which is in your gift to improve the number of occasions that particular desire is satisfied?
Well, thank you, Councillor Wales, for bringing up the subject of the home choice scheme. It actually covers 7 districts rather than 5. And I actually had a look at the figures today. It's a shame this is being recorded, actually, because I had a look at the net figures for how well Colchester did, how many people moved into Colchester as a result of this scheme, and how many people moved out. I have to say, we're one of the biggest winners. Us and Ipswich are within, I think, a couple of households as being the biggest winners on this scheme, that we have far more people moving out as a result of the home choice scheme from Colchester to other areas than moving in. So actually, we're doing very well. If you'd like to have a word with the Mid-Suffolk Council, who are currently losing 70 properties a year to people moving in, they might have a slightly different view on this scheme. So actually, this scheme, which allows people choice, is doing very well. And what it also does is it sorts out some of the differences between the councils. For example, in Tiptree, we have a large number of properties that are suitable for elderly people, whereas Malden doesn't have so many. So we're finding people from Malden district quite like the properties in Tiptree, whereas our people are struggling for 3-bedroom properties, and Braintree have got quite a few of those. So we're effectively swapping those to Braintree. So what we're doing is very well there. And of course, we have already taken action on all our new builds, that they are reserved for people with local connections. That what we're doing under the home choice scheme. So we're already doing that. But that does work on a Colchester-wide basis and not an individual ward or village differential. So anyone in Colchester is treated as in the same area under that scheme, not vice versa. The other thing that we do that has an impact is that we do give, of course, preference to service families. And again, this is very important for Colchester as a military town. The average time on the waiting list for a service family is about 7 months less. Sorry, about 6 months less than the standard, because they are given preference for people of equal grade on the housing risk, or the housing register. So I hope that gives you some confidence that we are already doing a lot in that area, and we're actually doing extremely well out of that scheme. Just don't tell Mid-Suffolk, please.
Yeah, well, clearly I'm interested in Colchester, because this is the area we represent. What sort of weighting factor is given then to local? If you give an example, practical example, 4 very desirable council houses were built in the village of Oldham, which is in what I represent. There were quite a few parents then complained that their children would like to have had an opportunity to live in those houses, but none were allocated. Now, it may well be that people allocated had so much higher priority than the children of local people that the obvious thing to do was put in those with the high priority rather than those who wanted to be, grandchildren within walking distance sort of issue. So what is the weighting, and do you think the weighting is given to local applicants is sufficiently high?
Right. Obviously, I can't comment on the specific cases, but as I have said already, those properties would almost certainly have been allocated to people who are in band A or maybe in band B. Someone in band C, D, E or F might well like to live in that one, but their need would not be great enough to put them in there. And as I think I've also said with the weightings, we do look on the figures across the whole of Colchester rather than on a particular village. The whole scheme is part of the home choice situation that is reviewed regularly by the policy panel, I believe, and they look at it each year. So if you have representations, please make it to them. It's not in my gift to change the home choice one, it's between the whole 7 councils, because obviously it'd be quite wrong for one council to suddenly change the scheme and say people living in Colchester get plus 100 points.
Okay, Councillor Young wanted to come in on this specific point. Councillor Rowe as well, and I'm still with you, Councillor Small.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to intervene because it was a comment and a subject for debate when I was reviewed as portfolio holder, and I think Councillor Willits was then the chair of the panel, and there was a desire by the panel at that stage to consider local connection being a more, higher up the list in terms of priorities. And I think there was a session we had on that, and Karen Payton, I think, came to address the scrutiny panel on that subject. And I think, although it looks like it would be a really desirable thing, and I understand what is being said about local families want their children to be living close to them, there just simply isn't enough accommodation to allow that to be the case. Sometimes there's a local lettings policy put in for specific schemes, and these halfway flats that were recently built in my ward was a local lettings scheme, and it was designed that way to try and encourage people in 3-bedroom houses in Greenstead to move into 2-bedroom flats to free those houses up for bigger families. And there are other examples where that is the case. And I think in some rural building schemes that has been the case in the past. But I think it has to be done on an ad hoc basis rather than being, a higher priority, because the needs are just so great. And, anybody doing this role will know that you have people that are struggling with and fleeing domestic violence, so they're going to be up the top of the list of priorities. People that have got disabilities that need to move in terms of, accommodating their disabilities. And there's any number of issues, neurodiversity issues. There's a whole range of issues that actually make people say or think that they need to be at the top of that list of criteria. So I think housing officers do a really difficult job. But as Councillor Smith has said, we are in a gateway to home choice system, so any change in policy would have to be something that the other 6 members of that gateway to home choice allocation system would sign up to.
Before I bring in Councillor Rowe, I just want to make observations that from what I understand here across the 7 local authorities, Councillor Smith, you've made a really interesting point about some of those authorities having perhaps a distinctive type or oversupply of a certain type of property, enabling some cross movement of people. That sounds like a very useful tool that we have at our disposal for the benefit of everyone. As it happens, Colchester has benefited in terms of the way you describe being a winner, but it seems like a good approach. Is there any weighting on, for example, Councillor Willits talks about, our children want to live close by. I get that. But is there any weighting towards someone in a scenario, for example, who found themselves being a single parent with very young children? Do they have any more advantage over someone that perhaps is more of a nuclear dual parent family with children that just happen to want to live near their parents?
No, the marital status of someone is not a factor that's taken into account in the model. You know, you could get into, if you have a couple, it may be that the needs for the room space and what have you are slightly different to a single person with a child or what have you. But fundamentally, the marital status is not something, or relationship status is not something that the system looks at.
Okay, thanks for the clarity. I say that with empathetic desire, because people who find themselves as single parents have a particular challenge. I know that because my mum was one and I was a challenge. Okay, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just like to pick up on something that Councillor Willits mentioned and something that Councillor Young earlier mentioned as well, with regards to modular housing. It was on my list earlier, but I gave it up. But I gave up the mic before asking you, so I've requested to come back. Have we looked into modular housing at the moment? Is there any plans at all for us to be able to do it? And sort of, if not, what's stopping us from doing it?
Yes, there are plans. There is a site visit on the 6th, arranged for the 6th of November to look at it, and I would pay tribute to the work that Councillor Young did in setting some of the stuff up there. I have to say, though, as has already been said, the scheme in Chelmsford, it took Chelmsford Council 3 years before people moved in, and there are good modular housing schemes. There is also an example recently of a council that's had to shut its modular housing. So it's not a magic bullet, but it certainly is something which we would like to look at and consider, because quite frankly, paying the amount of money that we do each week to a landlord providing poor quality bed and breakfast accommodation is not something I enjoy doing, and any alternative to that I would be very interested in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Smith. I appreciate that. I do agree with you. It has to be done correctly, but sort of previous to your previous point, there being no magic bullet, and us not having necessarily well, Councillor Willett's point, as us not having a plan for mass housing. I'm hoping, because I've long been a sort of a fan of the modular housing, if done correctly, type model, and as I completely agree, there's some horrific examples of it done terribly out there, and as you say, some recent ones. But I do think it's something, as you say, that we should be looking at as a sort of biggest bang for our buck in order to house the largest number of people and help the most number of vulnerable people. So I implore you to look into that a bit more. Thank you.
Councillor Smalls, you've been very patient. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you for that. I think you've really impressed on us how serious this situation is. I thought it might be helpful if you could give us a feel of the demographic of people that are now requiring social housing and using housing benefit. I don't expect you to have, you know, numbers or anything, but to give us an idea, because Councillor Laws and Councillor Young touched on, you know, you can have people in extreme situations, possibly fleeing domestic violence, that kind of thing. But the feeling I'm getting, just through people I meet as a councillor, people I meet at work, my work colleagues, just people I know in my life, I know, I mean, I don't know their exact financial circumstances, but I know people where you've got, you know, somebody working full-time in social housing, and they can't work their way out of this problem. They can't, you know, I mean, obviously, in theory, people can always do another job and earn more, but then, you know, we've got an employment problem at a certain level anyway, haven't we? We've got not enough people doing the jobs, the jobs that don't pay enough. I haven't covered this, but we've got a shortage of people not doing the jobs that don't pay enough to pay for a house. Am I getting there? Yeah. So it you know, in jobs where people, it's a generational thing. So people used to be able to do certain jobs, teachers, nurses, postal workers, obviously close to my heart. They would do this job, you know, a few generations back, buy a house, be reasonably comfortable, and then their children might just about. But now you're getting to the grandchildren stage. There's just no way. And like people are working full time. And so this is what Councillor Willits was saying. But so I'm just wondering if about the the housing is just too expensive in proportion to the wages people earn. So, you know, sort of roughly, you know, these people who need the social housing, are many of them working? Or what sort of, you know, situations are they in?
Thank you. Yes, it's a very good question. And there's so much I hadn't covered properly. The average salary in Colchester, you would need to have about 8.5 to 9 times the average Colchester salary to be able to afford to buy a property in the bottom 25%. So I'm not talking about luxuries in Leafy Lexton or what have you, talking about starter homes and that sort of thing. I'm sure Councillor Willits and I can remember the good days when you took out your mortgage for 2.5 times your annual salary. That was the figure, and you could buy a reasonable property for that sort of money and maybe a 5% deposit. These days, that is not the situation for the current generation. And the point you make, that unless the bank of mum and dad, or maybe granddad and grandma, is open and available and willing to contribute, it's very difficult to get onto the housing ladder. And once you start paying £1,300 a month in rent, dead money, then saving for your deposit, along with all the other costs, is going to be increasingly difficult. So I think the point you make is a very fair one, that the wages in Colchester are not compatible with buying property. It's not much comfort, but actually the situation in Chelmsford and Brentwood is even worse, and in London it's considerably worse. But you make a very good point there. So it's not a situation that rented accommodation, social rented accommodation, is needed just for a small minority of the population these days. Many of the working population do. And what we've also seen is a case that many private sector landlords are refusing to let to people on any form of benefit, and that includes universal credit, which includes part of the working population. So it's a very difficult situation.
Okay, Councillor Smith. Members, anyone else wish to interrogate the portfolio holder? Okay. Well, I thank you very much for your time this evening. It's been very insightful. I think you paint a very difficult picture, and I know that perhaps it felt very pessimistic, but you're being very realistic, I think, with your analysis of where we're at, and you've made the point that this authority doesn't have all of the tools in its armoury to tackle the situation that we're in. I think that's a fair take. We note your work, and we will probably adjourn now for a break for 7 minutes, if that's all right, and then we'll have Councillor Goss up here. So can I see everyone back here at 26 minutes past 7? 1 minute, please. 1 minute. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much for that very brief break. We are now back on with the second headline act this evening. Councillor Goss. Councillor, you're here to talk about your portfolio, which is more than just litter and waste. There's a lot more than that, and I'm sure you're going to tell us about it. If I could just, from the outset, make sure that you cover these things in your presentation, because it might see off a lot of questioning. You'll have seen recently the local media coverage, and there's been representations made in this building about some antisocial behaviour in one of the car parks that you manage, St Mary's, and I understand that there's some movement towards trying to address that around the operation of it. And within the conversation this evening, it would perhaps be useful to understand a bit around that, a bit around the enforcement of the PSPO. You could also talk about the other PSPO enforcement, if you like. But with the car park, I just wondered if you would offer us an insight into any long-term thinking about potentially a barrier mechanic and a way of paying on exit, which does seem to be quite a common practice in a lot of municipal car parks around the country, particularly in South Essex. And I find it very, very convenient, although I do use the app, but I think that the simplicity of typing your car into a machine at the end of your outing and paying for that sum there and then and being released by a barrier seems quite a good idea, and it might go some way to tackling the challenge we have now in the very long run. So there was my offering on that one. Yes, Councillor Smalls.
I don't know if I need to declare this as an interest, but if we're going to talk about St Mary's car park, I live very close to St Mary's car park, so I've declared it before. I didn't know it was going to.
Thank you for that intervention. Okay, let's hear a few words from Councillor Goss about all the great work he's been doing over the last year and some of his vision for the future. Over to you.
Thank you. And as you quite rightly pointed out, neighbourhood services and waste is more than just waste and picking up rubbish. So I just thought I'd give you the headlines of what is actually covered in the portfolio. So it clearly covers recycling, litter enforcement and cleansing, keeping the streets clean, removing graffiti, getting chewing gum off the pavements, etc. We, of course, are a waste collection authority, and there's an absolute difference between what Essex do and what we do, because some people do conflate and confuse. Essex County Council is the disposal authority, so they are responsible for getting rid of it and processing it, etc. We also have a council fleet, so we've got obviously the various vehicles that we use for collection and disposal, and also we have some relationship with the NEP. So as you quite rightly pointed out, car parks, etc. We also do street naming and street name plates as well. And we also deal with public open space, the ID Verdi contract, all of our parks and playgrounds, etc. So it's an extremely large portfolio. It's one that I've been involved with, I think, for 4 or 5 years now. Something I'm very passionate about, and something that really is visible to every single resident of Colchester. So they either use one of our 75 plus playgrounds, they either see our staff collecting or dropping off recycling sacks, emptying food waste caddies, etc., etc. So they are the front line. There's well over 100 staff in the service, and it really is the front line that every single person in Colchester will interact with. So it is a service that is complex, and something that we should be proud of as a council. So some of the things that have happened over the last year, we've worked to reduce sickness, and we have reduced sickness across that service. It is a very physical service for a great many members of staff on our front line, very physical. So to give you an example, a member of staff will be picking up tons of rubbish a day and putting it into the back of our vehicles. They will walk up to 20 miles a day. To give you an example, a dust cart can hold between 10 and 12 tonnes of rubbish when it's filled. That's garden waste or black sack, etc. And that vehicle has to then be emptied, and then they have to go out and finish that route. So potentially they could fill up to 2 dust carts a day. So you can imagine it's extremely physically demanding. It's not quite as physically demanding with wheelie bins because the machine does the lifting. Hence why on those routes staff sickness is lower generally on average when you compare them. So some of the things we've invested in, we've done some work at the Shrub End Depot. I don't know if you've been there, but it is a working environment, and frankly it wasn't fit for purpose. So we have invested in new shower facilities for both men and women. We have improved the break areas where people come back to depot and eat sandwiches and socialise. And we have invested in what was frankly probably the worst area for our staff, and it has been improved. One of the other projects we were doing was to get rid of the baling shed and basically put a new building in, but we've decided because of the challenges on the council, we're not going to do that. We're going to try and make the improvements we need to that building. It's got an asbestos roof, but we are looking to try and improve it. We're also looking to try and get rid of the demountable cabin at Shrub End. If you go in there, the floor is literally falling out of it. It's not fit for meetings. So we are looking at what we can do to replace that with a new office building, because people need office space for meetings. But we're also looking at cost at the same time. So we also, the workforce in that area, not only being customer facing, but some of them do come from quite complex backgrounds in terms of their HR needs and support. And we've done a lot to improve the HR support in those areas. We've changed the mental health first aiders in that area from 2 to 9, really, really important. We have put in place a workforce support programme, and we've increased the investment in that depot. And we also pay for physiotherapy for staff that suffer musculoskeletal illness, because that's the biggest sickness area in that workforce because of the physical nature of it. It's not a desk-based job, it's a physical job with that out there. And I would encourage any councillor actually to go and spend a day on a route, because we are allowed to do that as councillors, and I've done it several times, and you really can't get more experience than being on the front line and seeing what our staff do. So, you know, if you want to do that, I would definitely recommend it. What we've also been doing to try and deal with some of the issues around the high cost and use of agency staff is we created 15 more permanent positions to try and reduce the need for agency staff. Agency staff will never disappear. You will always need them to cover sickness, training and holidays. You will always need them. We're never going to have 100% permanent staff. We will always run. And we were running at something like 80-20. So 80% permanent staff and 20% agency. We've tried to notch that up slightly so that the reliance on agency staff is less. And the good thing about agency staff is that if we do use them and we spot some superstars, they can then apply for the permanent roles, and we can then bring them onto our payroll and not have agency staff, which does cost more. So what we've also done to deal with the national shortage of HGV drivers is we are actually training our own staff, and we've put a number of our loaders and staff through an HGV training program, and they then become team leaders, and they then become vehicle drivers. And that is a much more cost-effective way, keeping our workforce, giving them a career path from a loader all the way up to a team leader HGV driver, and also an increase in salary because it is leading that team. The HGV driver is the leader of that unit that goes out to collect tons and tons of waste on a daily basis. One of the other things we've also done to elicit behaviour changes, we've brought in Wise. Wise is an external company that work for other councils up and down the country. And since April, we've actually given out 2,558 penalty notices for dropping cigarette butts or litter across the city of Colchester. It's not just city centre centric. Try saying that after some work on your teeth. City centre. I can't even say it now. But we do it across Colchester. So you will find people working in Grinstead. You will find people working in Newtown. You will find people in Mile End. You will find people in the city centre. And we have something like a 70% payment rate of those penalty notices before we look at taking people to court. If you get taken to court, you will be found guilty of non-payment from the evidence, and your fine will go up exponentially. There is currently a piece of work being looked at to increase fines. Government has taken the ceiling off what we can charge and increased fines for fly tipping and for dropping litter quite significantly. So we are looking at upping those fines as well. We've also got funding from Keep Britain Tidy from their chewing gum campaign, which has led us to purchasing a new gluten hoover, which you will see being used around the city centre. And it also carries water. So if somebody was sick on the pavement or something quite disgusting, they could remove it immediately. So it's quite a good piece of equipment. It's well over £10,000 that we got as a grant. And we also got some smaller suction cleaners as well. We have revamped the Vineyard Street lift so that has had all the mechanism completely changed, all the motor and everything else, so therefore it should not fail. Or if it does fail, it should be seldom happening. We've also done the Neat Streets project. We've done lots of numerous local events. The Knife Angel is one of the latest projects that you'll have seen outside the outside Jumbo, which we've got until the end of the month as well. We've got ballot bins coming to Colchester for cigarettes as well. We're trialling those in the city centre at the end of October, and basically people put in their cigarettes and it's in effect balloting on certain things, and it's proved very successful. So Google ballot bins and you'll see what I'm talking about. We've done a lot of joint action days across the city centre with days of action. They will continue. And we've also reached the finals of the Association of Public Service Excellence Awards for street cleansing and street scene work. And we are looking to tackle the A12. That's quite complex. It's disappointing where we are, but the A12 is a health and safety nightmare. Every council in Essex is basically having trouble keeping it clean. It belongs to the Highways Agency, but it falls to the local council where the road runs through to keep it clean. And it is a health and safety nightmare. So we did join a tender from Braintree Council, which went out. The cost of having a third party company do it up and down the A12 was cost prohibitive. And also all of the companies that bid failed the tender because for whatever reason Braintree decided to include something around training, and Colchester said no, we don't need that in the tender, and therefore all of the companies that bid failed by default anyway, but it did give us an idea of cost. So we are currently working with Braintree to bring up an in-house team to be dedicated to clean the A12. There are challenges around that because we should really get lane closures. Some of it we really should. So that's something we're working with Highways England on, as I think they're known now, and also getting them to cut back some of the vegetation where the litter is in the central reservation, etc. So it is complex, it is frustrating. Frankly, it doesn't look good enough, but it's not just Colchester, it's every city up and down the A12, or town up and down the A12, but we are looking to move that forwards. We have obviously made changes to the Saturday drop-off service and special collections. We have made improvements in trade waste, where it actually does become profitable in effect. And we are also starting a new service, which again has exceeded target already, where we supply bins to managing agents. So where we've got flat collections, we now can provide those bins when they need changing. And we also do offer a service to clean out bin stores if they become fly tipped, whereas before they had to use external companies. So we offer that. We've already exceeded target of income by quite a significant amount. We've also appointed a new contractor in August 2023. to a company called Plan B. But the majority of our recycling goes down to Whittam, to a company called Essex Reclamation. And if you're an avid follower of my Facebook page, which I'm sure many of you are, you'll see that I did a visit there only last week to speak to staff and see it being processed. So again, it's literally down the road. Food waste goes to Housestead, as you probably are aware, and our garden waste goes down the road to Birch. So actually, we're trying to be really clean and green with keeping where we process our recycling within the local economy and within the local area. So again, you probably could go and visit these facilities if you requested it, if you so wished, and I would encourage it. There is a new waste strategy being worked on by both Colchester separately, which the Environment Panel is leading, and that will publish its findings next year. And that's looking at every element of the waste collection service, including wheelie bins and single-use plastic sacks, etc. And Essex is also leading on a new waste strategy, which we are participating in along with all other councils in Essex. You know about garden waste charging. I'm sure we don't need to go through that again, because I think that has been well communicated, but I'm sure I'll get some questions on it. And the car parks, as you quite rightly say, do fall into the area of neighbourhoods. And I'll talk about the points on security. Street naming and numbering, street name plates I've talked about, and I've talked about grounds maintenance. Now, I had a lunchtime meeting with ID Verdi today, quite a robust conversation, which I'm happy to take questions on. I've talked about our 75 playgrounds and some of the challenges around funding those at the moment. We will be doing the new Highwoods playground at a cost of over £130,000. That will be starting this month. And we are looking and have been investing in a number of our playgrounds, and councillors have had that communicated to them recently via Rosa, where we have put some capital funding in from new park benches through to new equipment. And of course, we do look after the countryside and rangers service and Highwoods Country Park, Simbaline Meadows, etc. Average recycling rate is about 52 to 53%, and we are performing well on that compared to other authorities. And also, we have one of the lowest records on stuff going in the ground for black sack as well. So there's a lot I've covered there. We have 1,940 litter and dog waste bins across the city of Colchester. Most of them are, of course, in Mile End, as you'd expect. But that is a significant overhead for our staff to actually empty. So again, one of the things we have been doing, and it is our strategy, is to remove dog bins and put in place litter bins, because they are dual purpose. So in other words, you're emptying bin, not two. And I think that's a sensible approach. In terms of your specific questions on the car park, St Mary's, you are right that it will be closing early over the weekends. It doesn't stop people leaving. So one of the concerns that's been raised, I've had a number of emails and set them straight very, very quickly, because the Gazette story didn't quite give the right context, is people that go to the Mercury suddenly think they can't leave at 10 o'clock at night. That is not true. What is true is that you can't get in the car park, but you can exit it. There is CCTV, and we will monitor how closing at 10 o'clock is going to change the antisocial behaviour. There is a possible risk they could drive in the exit, but it is quite difficult to navigate that because of the way the exit is set out. And if it is boy racers, girl racers to be politically correct, that are going in there, they normally have quite low cars and low exhausts, and they do get quite prissy about damage to their vehicles. So the fact it's quite difficult to get in the exit hopefully will prohibit. If that doesn't work, we'll look at other measures, and bringing back barriers has been spoken about. We can look at that, but we need to test this first. What we don't want to come up with is a whole load of solutions without trying them stage by stage. So that is what we are going to do. So it won't prohibit people leaving the Mercury, and we will test it. And if that doesn't work, we will obviously change the approach. So, step by step, but quick steps.
On that one, just very specifically, roughly how long is this test going to go on for? Because obviously, I'm assuming it's going to involve human resource to put the temporary Harris fencing up and then to unveil it. I mean,
so I think we're going to test it for the next month and see how it goes, and then if not, we're going to have to, we're going to have to make some swift changes. We have been looking at, we've already got costs for other types of security mechanisms. That's already been done, or shutters, etc., etc. So we are looking at other solutions already and getting costs in place for that, so we can press the button, go through a proper procurement exercise where needed, but to get things in place. The other thing is we don't want to spend money on a solution that doesn't work, because this is taxpayers' money at the end of the day, and it's not exactly in plentiful supply, as we know. So we're already on that. You talked about payment machines. Well, we've kind of been around the loop on this before. The technology we've got works with MI Permit. It's all tied in. It all works. So that is what we're currently sticking with, and we've invested significantly in the current fleet of machines, and they're all very modern. So that's what we've invested in, and other councils are using them.
okay. Anyone else wish to talk about St Mary's car park specifically before we move on? I know there's a number of people that have generic. Okay, yes, Councillor Young.
Yeah, I think one of the points the portfolio holder didn't cover was the fines that you mentioned when you talked about this issue at the introduction. And I think that is where it's been a bit of a disappointment, actually. The PSP...
Sorry, Councillor Young, are you referencing the PSPO and the enforcement of it?
Yes, yeah, in respect of St Mary's car park. So it was the PSPO has been in place now for a year. It's a 3-year PSPO, so it's the longest PSPO I think any local authorities ever brought in. And we brought that in at the time. It came under my portfolio in addition to housing. We brought that in collaboration with Essex Police, and there was, there was a lot of effort put into getting that right and launching that. And I know that although there's been 55 warnings, only one fine has ever been awarded at £150. So I'm a bit disappointed that, there doesn't appear to have been that enforcement support from Essex Police, which, there has been problems in St Mary's. There was problems before the PSPO came in. We brought the PSPO in with a view to tackling not only St Mary's car park, but Turner Rise and the other areas that see this activity. And on the nights of action, which you and I have been out on, police have been in attendance at those and actually have done some of the work around this antisocial behaviour. So I think I would sort of push back to you that we do need to be once again pressing Essex Police to take a more robust and active approach to actually enforcing the legislation that we brought in with their consent. I'm concerned about the Harris fencing in the sense that we're paying people to put that across and then take it off again in the morning. I can't imagine it's going to look very pretty. And I think the solution has to be installation of barriers in the future. So I hear what you say in terms of it being a temporary fix, but I do think there has to be a long-term fix on that.
I think there were some questions in there. So I think the answer I've said is shutters being looked at. That's being priced up at the moment as a permanent solution, and that is being costed, and the costs go from here to here. So we want to make it appropriate. That is being dealt with at the moment. In terms of the police, my learned friend here to the left, I think we had this at the cabinet meeting only last week or whenever it was. That's come up, and I believe that Essex Police are supporting us, and there is a collective approach to this. I'm sure our leader might be able to give more.
The leader has had a personal hand in this and has kindly stepped up to explain. Go for it.
Thank you. I just Martin's absolutely right in the intent and the approach. Perhaps I could just, as I've had a fair bit of engagement both directly with the residents, I'm not the only one I know, but also with our partners, just say what I think will happen. We're very clear that we've made a promise now to residents of St Mary's, and we're going to follow that promise through. And it is, simply put, zero tolerance. So we've been very plain that the courtesy that we as public servants often apply to people, which is send you a letter, it's not going to make a lot of difference to people who routinely will pay no attention to the nighttime or the daytime life of other people. So I've been very clear, I expect this to be carried through. I know I'll have support from Martin and other colleagues here that we're not going to just send letters. We can send fines, so it's going to be a fine. I've been very clear and encourage, and I will follow this up, that and there will be some triggers for this, that seizing a vehicle, entirely appropriate in my view. That's a police action under the legislation, and they will have, as I say, their own due process. But that's the kind of thing. So you get fined if you, in my interpretation of things, you don't listen to that experience, then something worse will happen, and you'll have earned it. That's where we're at. In terms of the physical security of the place, there's, as described, we already have a lot of CCTV. This is about orientating it, adjusting it, and bringing in some additional security cameras. We've got very good links here, and frankly making it a priority for all those who will view it. So there's conversations about where you'll store information, what priority you give when you've got a city centre with lots of CCTV, and also security patrols. Now, I think this is one of those neat things from officers which will make a real difference. So our security service through Titan Security will have a call-out function. Now, we'll manage that in the way that we should. We don't want 30 people ringing up and saying, I need somebody now. So there's that conversation's being had, as I understand it. That service should now be available and being applied. I want to hear from the residents, and no doubt we will in the coming days. So that combination of a temporary and then a longer term solution in terms of physical security, thoughtfully done, as Martin says, a call out, which means that not just the police, who are very aware that this is not good for a collective reputation, for the business and attracting people into the city centre, for the police's proclamation of the importance of ASB, all of us in the same place, we're going to act. And that combination, physical security, enhanced CCTV, and a very robust zero tolerance approach, will nip this in the bud. I'm sure of it. Then the interesting challenge for us will be where you go next. Because actually, as a whole, we've got to make sure that ASB stays towards the collective top priorities, because it's about the quality of life. I'll stop at that. Thank you very much for your time, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, that's really reassuring to hear the leader and yourself as portfolio holder are taking this very seriously. It's not potentially just about St Mary's, because we obviously have other car parks in our jurisdiction. You never know what might happen. So I'm reassured by that. We'll open it up now. Have we done St Mary's? Okay, good. We'll open it up. I'll kick off, and I must apologise to the panel. I've triple booked myself this evening, and I will be extracting myself shortly. But to kick things off, I just wanted to ask the portfolio holder around an issue that we all understand dearly, which is, what do we do with our waste? And it does strike me that it's a peculiar situation where 6 miles north of here, glass is not collected, yet 12 miles south of this spot, glass is collected. And I have daily arguments, and I think I've said this in here before, I have daily arguments at home around the kitchen sink, because I am burning oil to heat hot water to wash up yogurt pots that I suspect possibly aren't even recycled. And I wonder if you could give us an insight into some of the challenges around the different types of things that we can and can't recycle, where you see it going in the medium and long run. And should I be putting my child's Smarties yogurt pot with yogurt still remaining straight into the black bin, because that is more efficient and actually greener than me washing it up with hot water that's come from an oil burner and then put it into a recycling thing? Because I need to be educated in the world of plastics. Thank you.
So obviously I saw this first, and you can even see the pictures on my phone if you want, or on my Facebook if you follow me, you're very welcome. But yoghurt pots actually used to be a bit of an issue in the marketplace, and the whole plastic recycling piece, and we spent quite a lot of time drilling into this. So let me take you through what happens. Number one, so when I was at the plant in Witham, I actually saw Maldon's plastic and recycling being processed, but it's all commingled, and it's a lower quality product because it all goes in a weed bin. So Colchester actually has to go through less sorting. So what happens, Maldon's goes through a process where a bunch of people, it goes through some very, very rudimentary mechanical sorting, but it's done by human hand. So you have human beings standing by a conveyor belt. I think it's my next career move. And they're literally sorting the rubbish physically by hand, because it's actually the most effective way of doing it, because the technology just is not there with artificial intelligence and infrared, just not there. So it's more cost effective to sort it. Because our residents do the sorting, we don't have to go through all the cycles that Maldon do. So Maldon pays a higher gate fee because they're having to have it sorted more physical labour, more cost. And it's a dirtier product. So when we have plastic coming in, it's plastic. When we have cans coming in, it's cans, because it's all separated properly. So we pay less than Maldon does because it's going through less of a process. So that is actually greener because it's not going through the machine as many times. What happens with the plastic sacks that come in with our cardboard and our plastic in, they go through a splitter. Those plastic sacks are then pulled off and they are burned. They are sent off to Germany to be turned into electricity in a very green way. I think they also go to Sweden as well. There's nowhere in the UK that does it. So we've got an energy crisis. We could use that waste and we could burn it, but we don't. We send it abroad. And when we had James Hayes as our previous contractor, we sent it off to Turkey to be burned in a cement factory. In terms of yoghurt pots, when China closed the gates a few years ago to plastic being exported, and there's much tighter controls in the EU and in the UK now about what you can export, what you can't. That caused a real glut of plastic on the global market. And as I think I've explained before, the price of recycling goes up and down. So I got the spot rates through the other day. It's all commercially confidential, so I can't release it, of what income we got from each waste stream. And that changes per month. So it's so much per tonne, but it always depends what's happening with the spot rate. So white paper at the moment, is at a premium, you get really good money for it. Whereas historically, plastic, you have to pay to get rid of it. So at this moment in time, plastic yoghurt pots, to answer your question, are at premium. Flower pots. The market didn't used to want them. They used to have trouble processing them and getting rid of them, but things have moved on. But they go through a washing cycle. So, not everyone will wash their yoghurt pots out, but they're not contaminated, but they will get washed. Labels have to get taken off, and that does go through a mechanical process before they get turned back into little pellets and then recycled. So we did spend a lot of time going through that. So if stuff is put in the wrong bags, it is sorted and it is hoiked out and dealt with, and put either into the right waste stream or it will get incinerated. What you have to remember at this moment in time is that Essex County Council is one of the very few councils now that still insists on putting black sacks in the ground, and they're going to continue doing that, I think, up until either 2026 or 2028. What other councils are doing is burning it, changing it into energy, or dealing with it in other ways. So it is something that Essex needs to deal with, because that means if you put it in a black sack in Essex, it will be put in the ground in Stanway at this moment in time at the Bell House pit. That's where a lot of North Essex's waste is going. It's buried, it's not being burned, it's not being changed into energy, it goes in the ground for the next 100 years.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Willits to continue this meeting as chairman now. Before that, Councillor Rowe and then Councillor McCarthy. can continue the scrutiny of the portfolio holder. Thank you very much. Good night, and my apologies. It won't happen again.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Willetts, you now the chair.
Carry on.
And if you don't mind,
I'm purely the pawn of the committee.
Councillor Goss, just one very quick question on the point that you raised earlier around the spot price. Do we sell everything at spot price, or do we have fixed contracts on any of our waste?
No, it's all tied into what the market rate is. It's spot rate because that's how the market works. So
okay, so there's no option to get fixed long-term contracts.
No,
you can't do that.
That's not how the market works. No.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of other questions, if you don't mind. I'll just rattle through them if that's okay. Sorry, first question. Just remind me, how long have you been the portfolio holder for this?
I think it's 4 or 5 years. I look in history. I think we're out of it for a year when there was a change of administration, but yeah, I think it's five years now.
I thought it might be longer than that. Perfect, thank you. The recycling rate that we have is roughly around anywhere between 51, 52, sometimes we get up to sort of 53-ish. Do you mind, what's sort of the target that we're aiming at into the future?
So as part of the Essex Waste strategy that all councils are involved with, they're looking long term to move every council in Essex to 70%. No council in Essex is doing 70%. Some of the horrific things they have put in the earlier versions of the waste strategy paper were things like 3 weekly collections of black sacks. I just don't think the public is going to go with that, and where it's happened elsewhere, I don't think it's worked particularly well, but that's some of the things they've been talking about. One of the other ways that you can push up recycling rates is to actually get the people that don't recycle to recycle. Now, having been out on the front line, and I would encourage you all to do it, is there are still quite a few households that are putting glass and other recyclable products into their black sacks, because when you pick them up, it's either by weight or by sound that it happens. Now, actually, under the Environment Act at the moment, councils are allowed to fine people for not recycling. And you can't just issue a fine if people don't recycle, but you can educate, then fine if they refuse to recycle. And I think you'll probably find that that use of legislation will become much more at the forefront of waste strategy going forwards, simply because we do have to make sure people recycle. There's still a bit of an attitude that, what's the point, because it goes in the ground? Well, I've just proved to you it doesn't. It really doesn't. So that's certainly something that you could use as carrot and stick to push it up. But long term, all councils are expected to get to 70%, very long term.
Okay, so can you put a time frame around how long we think we're going to get? Because I mean, for as long as I can remember, we've been in the sort of the low 50s number. So do we have a time frame as to when, I don't know, so we're going to get to 60%?
So I believe Essex has an aspiration to get all councils to that in the next decade.
But do we have an aspiration?
Well, we would fall in line with the Essex Waste strategy because we're part of that. We'd like to obviously get and beat other councils because we do perform fairly well. But that's part also of our own waste strategy review. So all of this will fall out of that.
So we're just following whatever Essex do.
So, well, Essex, as I said earlier, is the waste disposal authority. So they have the ultimate responsibility for dealing with all the waste legally. You know, we don't have a waste disposal licence, and nor do other councils. So by some respect, we do have to input and follow their lead. But obviously how we collect that waste and how we deal with it is down to the individual council. And that is part of the waste strategy review that we're doing alongside what Essex are leading on. So it's hand in glove. You will get the results of that early next year.
Okay, so we publish the results of what we collect. It then goes to Essex County Council. Essex County Council sort of what numbers are we actually talking about from a 60% perspective? Are we talking about what we collect, or are we talking about what they recycle once they collect, once they give?
We're talking about the overall amount that's collected and recycled. So all of the the figure for Colchester includes everything that is in effect recycled in commercial waste. That became clear at one of the other scrutiny meetings.
So when do we think we're going to get to 75 for the collection rate?
So, as I said, we are working on a strategy. I think I've answered that, and that strategy will publish next year. So out of that, we will have a clearer pathway with where our waste collection services will go.
So we've been doing it for 4 years or 5 years or whatever it is, but we're going to publish it next year. So we're still looking at it.
Clearly, I hope the rest of the panel seems to be understanding me. As I've said, there is a waste strategy for Essex, which is long-term, which we are inputting into along with every other Essex council, hence the word Essex, and then all the councils in it. And then we are doing our own waste strategy at the moment in conjunction with that, which is being led by the Environment Panel, which will publish next year, which is a route to branch review. That will drive out where we go next. I think I've been really crystal clear. If anyone's not understanding me, please say.
So you can't give the future date as to when you think the next strategy is going to do. What's the current date for when we think we're going to hit it before we revise it in the next strategy? It doesn't seem like we have a date of when we're going to hit that 70%.
Yeah, I think it's your misunderstanding. Is if the other panel don't understand, please jump in. I've said the review will drive that out. That's the whole point of doing a review of a strategy and then producing a new one.
Yeah, that's fine. So you're saying that we haven't previously had a date that we've been working towards? Because we're waiting for one for...
Sorry, you're confusing and conflating. I think, what is it you're asking? Because it isn't really clear.
I think it's done on a year by, all we do at the moment is set the target for the forthcoming year as a KPI, and we do no more than that at the moment.
Yep.
But there is a long-term plan which is going to be superimposed upon that, which will give some clarity and direction for the next decade.
But we don't have one at the moment.
But we don't have one at the moment.
No,
Right,
but
so that's what I'm trying to tease out. I'm trying to get at is we don't have a long-term plan at the
so
moment.
that's
It's
the
a
point.
year by year.
That's the point I keep explaining. That's what we're working towards in conjunction with Essex, as other councils are too.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think you also mentioned that you were, it sounds like a great scheme, training HGV drivers. If we're paying to have those drivers trained, are they tied into contracts with Colchester for any period of time? I think you pointed out that there are obviously guys that are in demand. So are we training those guys and then they're leaving and going elsewhere, or are they sticking with us?
So like any commercial organisation, if you go on an expensive training course, you are tied in for a period in your contract, which I'm sure Jessica can probably, or Jess can probably give more detail on, because it's an HR and staffing matter, but the answer is yes.
Okay, awesome. If you could let me know what that is. I mean, you don't have to, but if, yeah, I can email you afterwards if you don't. Thank you. Especially sort of campaigning around places like Highwoods, pavement parking is often raised on the doorstep. And, you know, whenever this is raised, we always get into the situation of the NEPP say it's the police say it's the NEPP. I understand that we're not London, it isn't banned, people can park on pavements, but I understand that also people can be moved on, people can be moved around. What options do we have to resolve this, as it is, and I'm sure you're aware, raised on a fairly regular basis?
Yeah, so it's NEP. So NEP is the acronym. It is purely a police matter, right? That's what the legislation is very clear, apart from in London, because they have their own bylaws. At this moment in time, Parliament was working on legislation to basically give local authorities the ability to fine people, or the traffic wardens to have that added to their legislative skills, and they can then issue fixed penalty notices. At this moment in time, Parliament has stalled, so there is no update. So it is down to Parliament to put that legislation in place for us to adopt, and then parking wardens can issue tickets in the same way they can for every other parking offence. At the moment, it's down to the police. There is nothing we can do about it. Simple as that.
Nothing we can do, not even through traffic regulation orders?
No, I think we've been through this previously. No. It is awaiting legislation, and that is what we need. So it's down to government ultimately. They were making really good progress, but for whatever reason, they seem to have got other priorities.
Is it impossible to put in traffic regulation order?
I think we've been through this before. I think I've seen correspondence with you on. We've been through it, and I think explained it, that basically we need the legislation. That's the short answer.
Recently, the clear bags have been delivered. Quick question, so who actually delivers the bags? Do we know, or can you sort of point out how much this costs? And what alternatives to the current solution do we have around delivering those bags?
So the only solution would be we stop delivering them, which I think would be a retrograde step, because if you don't make recycling easy for people, then some will go out and collect. I think we had about 20,000 households pick up plastic sacks, or whatever the figures were, when they need refills, but they go to every property that has a recycling service. And officers have said, we'd like to stop doing it, and I've said no, because I think it's retrospective.
Who delivers them, sorry?
Well, it's a mixture of our staff and agency staff. So we have to get in hire vehicles, and then we have to use our own staff, plus we also use agency staff, and that's how we do it every year. And I think the cost from memory was something like about 70,000 quid.
Thank you.
Like that.
So the only alternative we have is to have our staff or agency staff deliver those. There are zero other alternatives.
Well, yes, human beings have to be on the back of vehicles, and they have to deliver them to.
Well, I know, but I mean, I am under the impression that you're given a number of different solutions around who could deliver those bags, and I'm just trying to ask you the question of, is it just our officers that is it just our staff who could do it, and agency staff, or are there other people that we could lean on to do that?
So our staff, etc., are the ones that know the routes, and obviously they follow those routes and have access to them. You could, of course, outsource it, but that would cost more money because there'd be a profit margin on it. So the most cost-effective way is our own staff supplemented with agency staff, following routes, getting the vehicles in for that period, which we obviously have a good rate on when we hire them in, I think from Robertson's, and that is the most effective way of doing it.
So that was the only option you were given by officers?
Well, how else do you think they're going to get
delivered? No, I'm asking you the question. I'm asking you if that's the only option, then all you have to say is yes, that's the only option.
I think he's, if I may, I think he's referring to the options that were given A, B, C and D or something earlier on in the year, or during the summer sort of thing. I think that's what you're referring to, Councillor.
Well, yeah, I'm just asking what options we were given. I'm not saying what the decision of the most cost effective was. I'm trying to ask what options were we given to do that, or were you given to do that?
Well, no, the options are either we deliver them to people's houses or we don't, and I chose we are going to deliver them. And then the other option was when they were done, and I wanted them done as quickly as possible by our staff and agency. So
but that's not A, B, C, D, whatever it was that you was.
No, I know, but I'm just saying rather than 1, 2, 3, and 4, I could have said that. I'm just saying that it was either people go and collect them, which Councillor Goss has said several times that he said no, that we need to still deliver them as well, and that was basically it. He decided that he would deliver them, or they would be delivered. So I can't understand what. No, forgive me for interrupting, but
no, it's fine.
Colleagues, let's not get too excited. It's bad if blood pressures go up. The question has been answered. I mean, we're asking Councillor Goss for his view on how he manages portfolio, and I think the answer, he's given his view on what is the best way to do it, and that is what we have to accept. That is the fact.
Yeah, no, I understand it. It wasn't actually on his view, it was on the options that he was provided, but I think he's provided that, so thank you.
Yes, that could be policy panel work, but we've had the view, and we think that we want more information, we ask him more questions, don't we? Yeah. Continue, please.
No, that's fine, thank you very much. That covers everything that I had, thank you.
Okay, who's next? Because I lost this. Okay.
Councillor Goss, thank you. I wanted to brush on sickness. You mentioned it right at the beginning of your report. Now, we get KPIs as a panel in June or July. Over the last few years, certainly whilst I've been a councillor, Environment as a service has traditionally bumped up the numbers, and we've never quite reached our target. Now, if we look at the sickness rates report by service, environment overall 14.5 days, long-term sickness 9.35, short-term 5.1. You mentioned right at the beginning that that's improved. I presume that's the last 6-month report, you know, the half-year report. A, do you have those figures? B, what is being done to support staff long-term? And of course, short-term, but certainly in the long-term, because that was something that really concerned me. Thank you.
No, it's a good question. So overall, in August 2022, there was 20.94 days lost through sickness, which is a working month in effect. In August 2023, it's reduced to 13.25, which is a reduction of 7.69 days. Long-term sickness in August 2022 was 14.51 days. It's now been reduced down to 8.88 days. That's a reduction of 5.63 days. Short-term sickness, less of an issue. The average in August 2022 was 6.43. It's now 4.37. That's a difference of 2.06 days. So there has been significant reduction in both days and percentages across the service through good management and also physiotherapy and the other things we put in. Because at the end of the day, the care of our staff is key. Hence why, you know, wheelie bins is one of the things they've requested, and that is proven to reduce sickness. There's no question. There's a correlation between the route somebody is on and sickness. There's no question about that. And thank you for the question.
Brilliant. No, thank you.
Any more, Councillor McCarthy? Councillor Smalls next.
I've only just thought of this, follows on from the sickness, from the physical injuries. Do council workers still get a cheaper membership at Leisure World? Because what I'm thinking is, I'll carry on, the refuse workers, because it's a physical job, they'd probably benefit from certain, and if they were encouraged to, I mean, mind you, it's probably the last thing they want to do. But I know, however, because my job as opposed to, it's not as physical, it's different, but it's physical. And then the danger is, you think, well, that's it, I don't have to do anything else, but it can, certain exercises can help prevent injuries. So it's just a quick thought.
Yeah. So for the record, obviously it's recorded. Yes, they do. As you say, whether somebody chooses to go on the running machine and go and lift some weights after they've had a workout anyway, you're quite right. But yes, the option's there for them.
But that would be covered in your statement about the additional physio service which we're giving as a caring employer. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Goss, brilliant that we're encouraging our collection services team members to progress by going on to being HGV drivers, and obviously that's going to retain our staff longer and keep our recruitment costs down. You did mention about bringing the agency down to for in-house staff. At the moment you said it's 80-20%. Do you have a target for that?
So you'd probably always have to operate with a figure of about 10%, because an agency staff are quite unreliable. So you might be expecting 10 bodies to turn up at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6:30, and you might only get 5 of them turn up. So it can be quite unreliable sometimes to use that route, which then obviously causes you staffing issues. There's also potentially the risk of higher missed bins on routes that people are not used to, although you've got the technology covering it. Obviously the agency staff, including agency drivers, don't always know the routes as well as the permanent staff. So there's just extra benefits to having permanent staff and reducing the numbers that we have to use, but we will always have to have agency staff. They're a necessity of running the service.
Councillor Goss, just on that point, sorry, Chair. Am I okay?
Yeah. Well,
Sorry,
Councillor Arnold finish
Apologies,
first.
apologies.
She has the floor, so the tradition is that you have a line of questioning, you follow through your questions.
Yep, so you're looking at 10% to 90%. Do you have a target for when you're going to achieve that?
Well, that's the journey we're on to at the moment. One of the challenges, of course, is we have a recruitment freeze. So on the one hand, we've had 15 posts signed off. Every time any service wants to recruit somebody, they now have to get sign off or support. So I do get emails from neighbourhoods saying we need to recruit this particular post, either because somebody's left retired, etc., or a vacancy's come up as for an HGV driver or whatever, and then I have to look at the business case and give it support, then it goes further up the chain. So at the moment we have a recruitment freeze. Recruiting permanent staff is a post by post, business case by business case at this moment in time to hit the budget levels. But of course there's the antithesis to that, that the more agency staff we have, the higher the cost, although they're easier to call in, but then that budget gets pressure, and that budget tends to get flagged every time because it can get overspent quite easily if you're not managing it properly, but our staff are.
Councillor Young, do you have any questions? If I could ask one or two, I'm sorry they're in a strange order, they're just the way I wrote them down, Councillor Goss. The first is a leftover from the last time we had the pleasure of your company at Scrutiny Panel when we were doing garden waste. At that time, there was a very interesting financial analysis of the additional income that would be received by charging for garden waste. But I think the panel noted at the time that the matching expenditure profile was not actually included. And we heard one or two statements which we didn't understand, that it would be very difficult to downsize the teams because you can't just sort of take people out and 6 months later, if garden waste perks up, add them to the complement again. Is it possible to have a more comprehensive profit and loss or income and expenditure statement of the charging for garden waste scheme, which includes both the incoming and the outgoings? I don't want it today. I'm just asking a question whether it's in your gift to provide that to us.
So this, as you quite rightly say, was discussed at a different a different panel. And I think the officers gave you a response at the time. I'm certainly happy to take the question away.
Thank you. My next point is, it's almost the anniversary to the day when we got the LGA's peer review documents with its very strong recommendation that we must look at our waste collection service. You certainly made reference to the fact that things are going on, reports will be coming through next year. Can I ask you, why has it taken you so long to get this review up and running? I mean, I know local government is pretty difficult to get any instant action, but you've always been sort of the action man of the council. So why is it here we are a year on, we've still not really got the results of the review and put it into action so that the city is benefiting from the experience of a better waste? Why is it taking so long?
Well, being a man of action, of course, it's a team game, and as I referred to earlier, it's actually the responsibility of the Environment Panel. They own this piece of work because it's cross-party. Some of the delay has been, I'll be frank, poor attendance by some of the members of that panel, where some meetings were scheduled, and I think one councillor turned up at the Shrub End Depot. So that delayed things a bit because we had to in effect rerun the meeting but do it remotely. So that slowed things down. As it's running in conjunction with Essex's waste strategy, that's been slowed slightly. But the Environment Panel is all over this now, and it is scheduled to deliver, I believe, the early part of next year.
And what do we mean by the early part? Is the early part of next year August or July?
Well, on my calendar, I think it's January, February, actually. I believe that's when it will be coming out the sausage machine and being published.
That is excellent news, Councillor Goss. Moving on to my next point, and I'm sorry that they're random, our climate emergency resolution. I note that you have provision of council fleet requirements under your your control, although again that seems to go to one of the other panels for review. But when is the day when we will be able to say we have no more internal combustion engines participating and driving the waste service?
Well, that's a bit like asking me when I'm going to revolutionise the car industry. At this moment in time, fleet has a depreciation of between 5 and 7 years, depending on what it is. We've purchased our fleet rather than lease it because that was more cost effective. We may go back to leasing it in future. It all depends when it comes up because business cases are done, procurement exercises are run, etc., etc. In terms of, and I've covered this quite liberally before, being a very liberal chap, the technology is not there for dust carts at the moment. They are just not there. You know, to purchase a dust cart was about £250,000. It's more than that now because of the rising cost of everything. But the technology is not there. We've trialled a couple of dust carts. They only go at 30 miles an hour and they have to stay in the suburbs. You couldn't send it down to Mersey or Dedham or one of the other areas because it just wouldn't have the speed or capacity or range. So the technology is not there, certainly in the dust cart fleet. But the other fleet, you know, as it comes up, including road sweepers, the technology is moving. In fact, one of the things I didn't tell you is we have just put a bid in to try and get a grant for an electric road sweeper because that technology is starting to move forwards. If we get that grant, we will then look to procure an electric road sweeper. However, they are very expensive, as all electric vehicles are. So it is obviously a dichotomy of cost versus environment versus technology. And depending on what vehicles you look at, will depend. I mean, NEP has just taken a delivery of some new electric vehicles, but they're leasing them because it's worked out to be cheaper. So we are on that pathway, but of course, government seems to now potentially be changing the well, you know, depending on what Rishi Sunak does, you know, there are rumours circulating that the 2030 deadline of removing all, you know, non-electric vehicles may move. So, you know, we will also be driven by probably central government to a degree as well.
So, I mean, do you have any idea in your mind? I mean, is 2030 the realistic date for this council to think about having these freighters run electric?
Well,
or is it such an open question that you can't even have a long-term plan? You know, sort of, we want to comply with a 2030 or a 2035, or is even that going to be impossible in your expert opinion?
Well, I think I've answered, certainly I've answered thoroughly about the actual dust carts. The technology is not there. It would be a failure if we spent millions of pounds of public money on technology that will fail and not service the borough like Brighton has done. I think you'll find they went all electric very early and it was an epic failure, and they've had to put in place emergency vehicles to try and supplement the fleet. As I've said, as the fleet comes up, we will benchmark the technology and the cost where we are and replace it appropriately. Smaller vehicles are being replaced by electric vehicles. We're on that journey, there's no question. It's the bigger fleet that you can't do that to because they're bespoke vehicles, it's bespoke technology, and the technology is simply not there. And it's proven it's not there. So until the market can deliver the technology at an affordable price, we're not going to buy it. It would be ludicrous. You'd be the first to harangue me in public for wasting taxpayers' money. So you have to spend it as if it's your own. And I'm extremely conservative when it comes to spending money, including my own.
It's just that it's good to know that we're going to fit in with whatever the government targets are, and that should be one of our drivers. But I take on board what you say, that it's crystal ball gazing, and it's perhaps unfair to ask you to polish your own crystal ball. If we can look at a slightly different angle of the climate emergency. I notice the car parks are still full, overflowing. There seems to be no reduction in the number of vehicles coming into the city centre, despite all the talk that goes on about it. Do you have a view on how the use of car parks is going to pan out over the next year? You know, will we have only electric vehicles coming into the car parks, or will we not have car parks in future if your policies of keeping cars out is successful? You know, just you know, where are you leading us on the matter of cars in the city centre?
So it's incorrect to say that car parks are overflowing, because there's an excess on average on a daily basis across all of the car parks of about 800 spaces. And that has changed because of COVID, because people are working at home more often. They're not driving into work, or they're coming in less, or they're using the park and ride once a week. So in the week, there is absolutely a glut of spaces that people can choose and use our wonderful and excellent initiatives and discounts. But it's not because people are not coming to the city centre, it's because workers are simply working at home, including our own, council employees. So that's what's changed. At the weekends, that's not the case. The car parks are absolutely full and overflowing. So one of your statements was partially true and correct, but the other was not. Longer term, obviously, we have a strategy that's been published and in play for about 2 years now. And we also have issues that 2 of our big car parks will come end of life in the next decade because of the way they're built. They haven't got RAC before we start spreading rumours and things are published incorrectly. But we have had structural surveys done. They are safe. They've had some money spent on them. But both St Mary's and St John's are of the same age. I think they're coming up older than, well, they might even be older than me. But they have a lifespan of about 50 years. So they've probably got another decade. You can spend some money on them. You can spend millions of pounds on them. Or is the other strategic alternative that you knock them down and rebuild them in a different way? So all of that will come through in the coming years. It's something that we recognise now. Obviously, some of the car parks in the city centre have been in the local plan for over a decade. I think even going back to when the Blue Team run the show. So every political party's had their hands on the local plan at some point in car parking. And what I've just said about capacity will prove that you can afford to remove those car parks in the local plan, although Britannia has to be replaced as well. That's in the local plan. So there is a long-term strategy, and it isn't about not being car-centric. I think everyone needs to use their car appropriately, but the average vehicle journey in Colchester, or Carchester as we're known, so we do have congestion problems, which is down to Essex County Council's infrastructure, then, there are less than 3 miles for single drivers. And so that's why, there is a strategy to try and push people onto buses and park and ride and everything else to get them out of cars, because people are literally doing less than 3 miles, running to school or whatever. So I hope that answers your question sufficiently, Councillor Willits.
What is the budget implication of all this? If there's underuse at the during weekdays, but there's over demand at the weekend, how are you adjusting your charges to reflect and ensure that the council's coffers are kept well topped up by the sort of £2 million or whatever it is that comes in each year? It seems a bit of a conundrum that could well be difficult to solve, to ensure that the income from car parking remains buoyant and a contribution towards frontline services.
No, you're absolutely right, because it used to produce something like £4 million in its peak income towards the council's £20 million annual budget, and you're right, it is less than that, but that also comes down to doing the offers. So you offer off-peak offers, again another set of words, try and say that together, to try and manage that demand in the week, to encourage people to come in off-peak. that might want to come and do some shopping or come and spend lunchtime with their friends. So that is part of that conundrum that you mentioned. And then we've got Richard Walker, who looks at all of this data and the income. It's his responsibility. That's what we pay him to do, and he's world class at what he does. He's not far short of probably being Carol Vorderman in terms of numbers. He's exceptional, and we're very lucky to have him. So he deals with this stuff and adjusts things accordingly.
My final question, you indicated earlier on that waste and recycling works best if it's easy for people to do. In your view, how can we make it even easier for our population to ensure that recycling goes up?
It's a good question, and I covered it quite thoroughly earlier, that you could argue that having wheelie bins would make it easier because you just open a bin and throw it in or chuck it in. However, what that does do is increase the cost of dealing with it because you pay a higher processing fee or gate fee when it goes off to be recycled. And what it will do is there'll be higher contamination and a lower income because the recycler will be of lower value, will get less money for it on the spot rate market. And also it's not as environmentally friendly. So it is a dichotomy that we face, but we have one of the best and cleanest recycling systems because it's all sorted at source and it's clean. Costs us less money to process and is less impacting on the environment when we process it. And I've seen it for my own eyes only last week. So I think the system we've got is probably the best we're gonna get, but it is being reviewed as part of the waste strategy review. We are looking at everything. So changes are not off the scale, and we'll see what that review and the Environment Panel come back with early next year.
Are there any more questions, panel?
Yeah.
Any more questions?
One question, Chair. You mentioned earlier around waste collection staff. Could you just take me through again, please? Why are agency staff a necessity? Why don't we just hire more permanent staff and maybe put them on flexible contracts, for example?
So I think this has been discussed before, but it's because you've got holiday sickness training, and if you've got well over 100 frontline staff, that's quite a number to deal with, and those frontline staff could also be off sick themselves. I've read out the sickness figures. Agency staff is the most flexible way of dealing with it. And also trialling staff as well that might want to become permanent. So we will always use agency. And of course, what we do is we try and get the best deals with our agencies to get the best value for taxpayers as well by agreeing rates. They can't just charge us what they want on an hourly basis with their markup. We control the margin that they can add, etc., etc. So again, through procurement, we've got probably the best framework we can have with our agencies.
You said agency staff are more expensive.
In the short term, yes, because there's obviously a small profit margin on top of what we're paying per hour. But if you then ended up recruiting 100%, you can never get to 100%. You can never get to 100% because of the flexibility you need in that staffing strategy. And we've reduced it, or are reducing it probably as much as we can without having a detriment to the frontline service. So to give you an example, if you
I understand how staffing works.
If you had 100 people, 10 are on holiday, 10 are off sick, where are you going to get the 20 staff from? It's as simple as that. Do you take them off neighbourhoods? Do you take them out of the customer service centre? You just can't do it. You just can't do it purely. You have to have some form of agency staff to supplement it.
Fair enough. I mean, I'd like to investigate that more, but thank you very much.
Personal conversation, as Councillor Goss loves talking to us, so yes, and emailing us. So colleagues, any more questions? Can I thank you for what is a bravado performance again, Councillor Goss. If I think back, I mean, there were times when portfolio holders would turn up with a couple of senior officers who'd sit either side of them and prompt them on how to answer the questions. And what we've seen this evening, colleagues, we've seen two portfolio holders who really have grasped and understand the fine detail of the area of coverage and have been able to equip themselves well, answering any question that we bowled at them. And I think that shows, the calibre of people we have deciding on the day-to-day issues that face the city. So can I thank you for attending this evening, Councillor Goss. Thank you for at times clearly we were trying your patience, but you treated us very gently as naughty schoolboys and explained the issues in very clear and understandable terms. And it was really delightful to hear your explanations of how your portfolio is working and what you've brought into it and the activities you're taking to ensure that you know the best way to lead us. So I don't think there are any recommendations, certainly other than a pay rise for Councillor Goss. I can't think of anything that we could recommend, other than as the panel noting that it is in safe hands. If I speak for all the scrutiny panel
Well, I have
on
to
that
say,
matter, thank you for
Councillor
your.
Willis, coming from you, that's some of the biggest compliments I could ever have. Thank you. I'm going to walk out of here, will be in my next leaflet. Thank you.
Thank you for attending this evening. That item on the agenda, which is to look at the work programme, which has vanished from my screen, probably forever. Yes, it's probably vanished forever. Sorry about this, colleagues.
Just when you need it.
Just when you need it, it's gone. Yes, it's gone. Take us through the changes to the. I'm going to sit with my finger on the start button. Through the work programme. There were no proposals under section 9 this evening. There was a recommendation from a previous panel meeting that we have a meeting with the local highways panel, which needs including. Are there any other issues that we should be looking at or considering adding?
Not at this stage, Mr. Chairman. Just to note that we added the item that was brought to the panel under under item 9 at a previous meeting, to add an item on the council's approach and policy towards the use of owned community assets and whether to charge for their use, and one that you yourself brought. That's on the agenda for the scrutiny panel meeting on the 13th of February. I don't have anything to add at the moment, but I will follow up on the suggestion to meet with the local highways panel. I think we need to find out what's going on with the local highways panel first, but I can ask my colleagues and then see what we can do with regard to that. Not on this item, but to go back to a previous question that you asked earlier about resolutions from the scrutiny panel on the situation regarding the Capita data breach and data protection arrangements at the council, which was made by a previous meeting. I can confirm that those were taken to Cabinet on the 12th of July and were covered under urgent items, actually, as it turns out, under an open to the public minute. It wasn't a confidential minute as I had thought it was. Minute 764, where the Cabinet considered the Capita data breach as an urgent item, considered scrutiny panel's recommendations with regard to data protection arrangements at the council, and approved both of them without changes to the wording.
Oh, that's good news that we got right, and for once we were actually helpful to Cabinet rather than their normal opinion of us. So unless there are any other matters, I think that concludes business for this evening. Can I thank you for your attendance? I mean, this is quite an unusual meeting, just having two portfolio holders and having the ability to ask them anything. Next time we're back to the usual the usual hamster wheel of going through the issues. Safe journey home, everyone.